divide minus equal to. Queer individuals carry multiple identities of caste, religion, region, disabilities, and more. Is to minus these identities okay? Does it lead to equal representation or does it divide? Is sexuality the only determinant of the LGBTQIA plus movement? The panel will engage with each and every one of these issues. So let me introduce the panel in no particular order. Saddam Hanjabam, founder Yaol, Jyotsna Siddharth, Dalit queer woman, actor, writer, intersectional artist. Shivangi Agarwal, queer and disabled activist, graffiti artist, determined act movement. Daniel Mendoza, co-founder, Intersex Human Rights India, TEDx speaker. And this panel will be moderated by Nishad Mohammed. And I'd like to hand over to Nishad to take over managing this panel and this discussion. Over to you, Nishad. And I shall mute myself and go offline.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Shivraj, for that wonderful introduction. Hi, everybody. Hi to the panelists and the audience for watching. Hi, Jyotsna. Hi, Saddam.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, Daniel.
Hi, Shivangi. Hi, everybody. Hi, Daniel. So welcome to Digital and One, the Rainbow Literature Festival 2020. And our session, as Shivraj explained, is titled Divide Minus Equal To. So what is the first thought that occur in your mind when you see that? A mathematical question that results in a number, right? But why numbers? But why not? Are we all not just numbers though? Because be it a pandemic, a natural disaster, or just most of our policies in general, we're just reduced to a mere unidimensional number, just a statistic. But our identities, as Shivraj said, are more than just numbers. Our existences are not a monolith, and the lives of the LGBTQI plus community definitely aren't one. Because a queer person is not just a queer person. We are a Dalit, we are a Muslim, we are a Tamilian, we are a Manipuri, we are able, disabled, socialists, and so much more. And these experiences and the privileges we enjoy, the oppressions we are subjected to, the places we have access to, and the choice we make eventually are defined by each of these identities, and all of which are inherently political. So also these identities are not simply expressions of the past or the present, because they entail visions of the future. Therefore, it is essential that the multiple facets of being are represented and discussed, because at the end of the day, for the LGBTQI plus movement to truly progress, it is important to have an intersectional approach. And that's exactly what we're going to discuss today. The observations of how minusing and dividing of queer identities affect people and the overarching question of representation. So before we get into the discussion, a quick trigger warning, because this discussion could involve instances of caste-based discrimination, ableism, and racism that some of you might find triggering. So just that. And before I go on to introducing our panelists, I would like to tell the audience that you can drop your questions in the comment section and we'll pick it up at the end of the sessions. You can drop it as we proceed through the event and then we'll do it towards the end. So once again, thank you so much for joining us. First, Saddam Hanjabam is the founder of Yaol. Welcome on board, Saddam. Welcome, Jyotsna. Jyotsna is an actor, intersectional artist, activist, writer, and a Dalit queer woman. She's also the founder of Project Anti-Caste. Welcome on board, Jyotsna. And then we also have Shivangi Agrawal, who is a queer and disabled activist, graffiti artist. And then last but not the least, we have Daniel Mendonca, who is co-founder, Intersex Human Rights India, and also a TEDx speaker. Thank you so much, everyone, for taking your time and joining us today. So I'm going to start off with Saddam again, because the whole idea of this event is that we could get people from different regions be represented in different identities. And speaking of regions, as myself, as somebody from the south of India, from Chennai, I'm sorry, so before Saddam hasn't joined us, I think there is some connectivity issues, so we'll just wait for Saddam to join in. And I'm going to quickly go on to Jyotsna. Hi, Jyotsna.
Hi, Nishad.
Hi, Josna. Thank you so much for joining us. It's such an honor to have you with us here today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, Rainbow Fest, and all the panelists that I'll be sharing the conversations with. I'm really excited.
Great. Thank you, Josna. So, Josna, my question and the point that I'd like to discuss with you is that, the caste in the community is something that it's very rarely discussed. And, we have the Savarna members of the community who have somehow become the faces of the movement because of the privileges they enjoy. And they've tried to ignore the conversations and absolve themselves of the caste system. Because at the end of the day, the LGBT community, much like the larger society itself, is also built on the caste system and is also plagued by rigid caste hierarchies. And when we paint it as a homogeneous group, we only further the rising inequities within. So, as somebody who is fighting to lessen these invisibilities, how do you see like caste itself and casteism in pride parades and generally in LGBTQI plus spaces in India?
So, I mean, I would begin by saying that the movement, the LGBTQI movement, like any other movement, has been very sort of homogenous in the sense that the leadership was, and to a certain extent, even now, is of again people with caste privilege and with a certain religion, I would say privilege as well, and and there is this sort of I think that the way it has the movement has progressed, that it is only focused on, I would say, primarily the rights of gay and lesbian groups, where I feel that the rights and agenda of trans people have really been at at the back burner, and I find that simply interesting but also problematic, because I think that that is uh, caste itself, you know, and how do you then layer and organize rights and agendas within the movement, where certain groups again have more preference, and you know, like their lives are then constantly seen as to be pushed for, where I feel that the trans people and their issues intersecting with caste, religion has not really taken the forefront, and and what I would actually like there were a few points that I actually took down, that you know, I mean, I imagine change on three levels, and this is not this is just how I see change. One is in the very intimate family space, where we're negotiating our identities and engaging with ourselves and with our families, with our friends, lovers, all of that. And then on the other hand, there is a change that we imagine in our workplaces. Where do we work? You know, what are our negotiations and around our work, the work that we do, and all of that. And then there is a socio-political change which we're trying to drive through a community and through our organizings and all of that. Um, because of the lack of understanding of caste, or I would say willingness to engage with caste and religion intersections, what has happened is that the LGBTQIA plus movement have not understood that the marginalized groups and people who come from the positions, marginal positions of caste, religion, um, including trans folks, their upbringing and their socialization itself is very queer. So it's not that caste is separate or outside their upbringing and their life. So that itself has that is part of your identity, your queer identity. You know, I mean, for me, like if I look at Dalit community, I feel that because there has been so much retaliation and questioning of the mainstream, I see the community as queer itself. So queerness is not something which is outside the community. It is very much part of how you grow up, how you negotiate, how you interact with people, all of that. So I think that for me is something that is fundamentally missing in our understanding of how do we place queerness and our sexual identity primarily, and the lack of that intersection with caste and religion.
Thank you, Jyotsna, for being absolutely articulate as always. And as you rightly mentioned, we are like divided into groups, and a lot of our representation is not there. And one of the things that we often come across is the sort of hegemony and the monopolization of people from mainland India, in particular, occupying LGBTQI plus spaces. So I'd like to go to Saddam here. Hi, Saddam. Thank you for joining us. Hi. So, Saddam, as Jyotsna just said, like regions, all these things matter. And for me, I'm from Chennai, and whenever I see discussions in like, the national discourse with respect to the LGBTQI plus movement, I don't see enough representation for people from my region who grew up with the kind of politics that I did. And leave alone, Chennai is again a big city, but again, for somebody like you from Manipur who's constantly fighting that even while being in mainland India and spending a fair bit of time in Mumbai and Delhi. So could you tell us a little about that, how this invisibilization of where you come from also, increasingly marginalizes already marginalized further?
Hi, Nisha, thank you very much. And yeah, good afternoon to everyone. So mostly to start with, I for many of us like who are from the Northeast, the only thing to find a safer space was to migrate to other cities where we can be ourselves. So that was one reason why most of the young people from our region, they had to move out. Because for example, see for Manipur, the Armed Forces Special Powers Act and everything, like I myself went to local because without any reason, because just on suspicion. So for many young people who are either queer or not queer, the only space where they feel, where they thought might feel safer, is to migrate from this region and to move out to another region, which is more visible. So, and for me and for many other people, for me it was Bombay first. But what I realized after reaching there was there was so much of what do you say, less representation from the region of how the knowledge, our knowledge was also very much limited when we talk about the LGBTI and queer community as a whole, because we were not we don't talk about all these things when we were at home. The talk was more about the other human rights violations which happened because of self-determination movement and also because of strong militarization and no jobs opportunities and no higher education opportunities. So our talk was mostly surrounded around either education or safety and how to stay safe. So the only when we move out from our own states and start finding our safer spaces, we realize that there are already so many spaces outside the region. But again, the problem was to mingle with them. So there was always a dominant structure and always not dominant ones, where when we try to navigate and try to fit in, we have to try very hard to navigate and mainstream with the other population. One, the issue of racism always comes up, and people say that it's casual, like it's a joke. But no racism is not joke. It always comes up when they talk about how we dress, how we eat, how we behave, how we stay. So in every step, there were jokes were made on it, and that became one problem of how we could not mingle with majority properly who do not understand us. The issue was we know almost everything about mainland India, but the problem started because they don't know anything about us. So first it was said that there was this idea of superiority and inferiority. We are made to feel that we are inferior, but somehow we also realize that we know more than so much of you, but you don't know anything of us. And so the problem of mingling, so the problem of mainstreaming became problematic. And in the movements, in almost all the movements of queer history, check where is there any, there were there any proper representation of Northeast? Like, Northeast not just one state, it is not homogeneous. It is 8 states. There are 8 states and all are different. And people know Northeast as one single unit, which is again very problematic. So it's like, when people say North India and we don't know where which state becomes in North India, and when say South India, it's like 4 states. So this becomes very problematic. And for Northeast, what happened was, because this region has always been separated because of our own, value system, belief system, and also of the same self-determination movement. These were not included in the mainstream, queer movement, queer rights, or even if when people say that it's invisible. If yes, it is invisible, but when we are becoming visible and try to mainstream with other larger populations, we are again pushed back, saying that you did not take part when we were fighting. You are just coming out as a new person. We fought all the way, and you are just coming out and claiming your space. That is one thing which we really find intriguing. That if we are talking about equality, or if we are talking about equity or justice, that's very problematic. That we were also fighting our own fight here in the region, but somehow when we are trying to mingle with you again, then we are facing resistance from within the community. That you are new, that you have just started, kind of thing. So which is very conflicting when we talk about equality or equity or justice. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Saddam, for those points. And, absolutely, as you rightly said, we always propagate this idea of homogenizing the entire Northeast, because the story of a single Northeastern state is not the story of all of it. There's some, for example, you are from a conflict region, and a lot of, how you go about life, and just, for example, even mental health requires a lot more focused approach than what probably the rest of India or other regions are facing. And speaking about, again, invisibility within the community, one of the pillars of the LGBTQI plus movement that is constantly invisibilized just within the movement itself is the intersex. Just the lack of understanding itself, even within the community of, there's this unwritten sort of hierarchy that these things, they can wait, while the gay agenda and the same-sex marriage can be talked about more. So here I'd like to bring on board Daniel Mendonca. Hi, Daniel. Thank you so much for joining us.
So lovely to see old friends here virtually, and it feels so amazing to feel that way. You are right. I think one of the reasons of invisibility of intersex community is our own less understanding about the community, and always mingling it up with the trans community. And for many years, I think proving that whether you're an intersex or a trans, you need to prove yourself, has been again one of the highlights of why do intersex people do not want to come out and say I am intersex, because the shame that is attached, the stigma that is attached. And moreover, one of the reason is also, which I have found out with my own experience and over the time, of course, is the fear of, if you are born intersex, and I'll be blunt on this, I know, but I'll be blunt on this. Keep the fear of you will be taken away by the dominant hijra culture, and therefore you will not have a life, and you have to be with them for entire life. One of that is a fear that has always kept the intersex community not talking. If you know, like, all our experts here, but to tell the other people that the word intersex itself is the most rarest word that was added in 2013-14 with the UN fact sheet that came up to, and that's how the I actually got introduced into the LGB. But if you look at the mythology, which is quite fascinating from India, there are different words like hermaphrodite that was used. In Hindi, it's called dwelling, or different words in different mythologies were always used to describe intersex people. But I don't know how, like, that will be a mystery to all of us. I don't know how caste and class and some privileged people managed to get into the trans agenda. And that became a problem, because for a lot of people now calling themselves intersex becomes easy, but for, I don't think, like a 5 years down the line, people would also know the word what intersex is actually. Because the I still today in the LGBT is, a lot of people think that it's about inclusion. I stands for inclusion, I have to, and I and other people have to stand up and say, no, I does not stand for inclusion. It stands for intersex. And one of the reasons why also it is invisible is because intersex has always been taken as a disorder by a lot of medical facilities. Like, when you are born, and now we are saying that, I had a conference and said, instead of calling it a gender disorder, instead of calling it a genitalia disorder, we should call it a difference in sexual development. And I think these words are very necessary to bring in factors, because you do not have to be ashamed of what genitalia area you are born with, or what are the different kinds of 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 beautiful unique identity you hold as an intersex person, because every intersex person is different from someone or the other, and therefore words needs to be changed. And because whenever, like for example, gender disorder was used for transgender people, it was something that could be treated, and that became the procedures for medical doctors to come into the field and earn a lot of money out of us. And I will say that, earn a lot of money out of us without doing the proper treatment, because somewhere or the other, even the community was not aware of, in the process of becoming who they really wanted to become, of spending that much money and not having a lot of proper treatment. And still today, in many of the hospitals where one of my RTI to a government hospital to find out how many intersex people are treated, I did not find a single number. But then I thought of redefining my RTI, and I wrote about asking them a data of how many people are treated for hormone treatment, and I was numerously shocked for the data that I received from the government, because a lot of intersexuality is to do with people having variation in hormones. And that is scary, because if it is not in their mind that this is what I am, and in a lot of countries, if you know, with my experience while I'm traveling, intersex is counted as a heterosexual criteria in a lot of other countries, because you are born that way, and because you then decide what you want to become depending on how. But in many parts of the country, intersex is taken as a complete different segment, because in India we are still not away with male and female even in our birth certificates. So even at the time if you're born, your birth, you still have to decide which gender you would fall onto, whether male or female. And if you do not fit into one, there where it comes when doctors forcefully ask parents to assign the child from birth to a particular sex, and then do their children's exchange surgery. And it is sad to say that even after so many years of working in founding the IHRI, I still remain the first intersex person who's openly out in Bombay. And that really scares me, because where are my friends? Where are those who are suffering? Why is this inaugurance so much? And why trans people cannot open up a data and say we have intersex folk within our communities?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for those powerful points. And as you rightly said, the intersex identity is also invisible primarily because one, yes, the understanding, but also just that it's considered same as the trans identity. And as you also rightly mentioned, the onus falls on, unfairly falls on the intersex people itself to explain that I stands for intersex and what it is about. And the same kind of onus is what we've seen with the disabled people of the LGBTQI plus community, something that often goes completely neglected. So I'd like to bring in Shivangi here. Hi, Shivangi. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, yeah.
Hi.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Shivangi. So Shivangi is a queer and disabled activist and a graffiti artist. So Shivangi, the invisibility of disability in the LGBTQI plus movements and the spaces and how the onus of calling out ableism and demanding accessibility itself unfairly just rests upon disabled people, because even our pride parades are largely inaccessible. So what exactly how do we approach this, and how, could you share a few experiences that you faced itself as somebody who's been at the forefront of the movement?
Yeah, definitely. I think that the most important thing that we need to do in the queer movement is like listen to disabled people and give them space to be leaders, to have their own autonomy, to actually listen to them. Because I feel like even now, in our areas, in our own neighborhoods, we don't have access, we don't have accessibility, we don't have knowledge of what are the laws, what are the uh, the government, what are the things that government is saying about disability. Because even in the government right now, most of the voices that are speaking about disability are able-bodied caregivers or parents of people with disabilities, but not disabled people themselves. And that's very much lacking, because a lot of times leadership in disabled people is not seen. It's not, people don't people see a disabled body, or they see even if it is invisible, even if a disability is invisible, why should it matter if we are invisible? Why shouldn't we work on accessibility anyway? And accessibility takes a lot of work. Instead of just demanding for accessibility, we need to work on it. And that's one of the things that, like, I also experienced when I started going to the Pride Parade in Delhi. The first time that I went, I asked some of the committee members if we can work on disability, not or work on accessibility, not going and like demanding that why isn't there accessibility? Because I know that, like, most of the people are able-bodied in the queer movement. Um, and those who are organizing are able-bodied, and that's very, because not a lot of disabled people can always be in the forefront, and so it's very important to listen to disabled people. So the next year that I went, we worked on accessibility, we worked on getting a ramp on the stage, we worked on this together. It's not just disabled people working alone. It has to be we really need caregivers, we need allies, we need people who are around us. And that's what the disability movement has always been about as well, is working together. It's about collective access. It's not just individual access. It's not like access for a physical disability or mental neurodivergence or something like that, but it's a collective accessibility. Because it's not just opening up our movements, but also opening up our homes for disabled people. How many disabled people do we interact with in our lives? um, how many disabled people have we visited in their homes and had food with, and things like that. And that's why I feel like it's very important to, uh, in at least in the queer when we're questioning when we're questioning sexuality, we're questioning gender. It's very similar to questioning the disability as ableism as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Shivani. Also, I'd like to dig a little deeper, Shivangi, I'm sorry. I'd like to dig a deeper into that. Now we have sort of, put it out there that the different invisibilities, many of which we spoke about. And ableism, when you talk about that, and when we talk about disabled people in the community, we often don't talk about the desire part of it. We're often just, it's about accessibility and it ends there. But then the whole idea, we need to discuss desirability, because only then can we get to things like consent and talk about what's right and what's wrong with respect to consent. So how do you see us making progress, and what do you think the way forward is there? Because we can't just, as you rightly mentioned, stop with that's the first step, making it accessible. But then further, how do we look at other aspects like desire that is often never discussed, especially with respect to disabled people?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a lot of when it comes to desire, there is a lot of like fetishization of disabled women, and I think that is that causes a lot of problems, because a lot of people don't even understand disabled bodies, and like a lot of times the kind of questions we get is like, how do you have sex, how do you will you be able to have babies and things like that, and that is very similar to queer movements as well, where constantly there is a question of reproduction, and that is not something that queer people are interested in, and why should a body have to reproduce to be able to have some kind of autonomy, have some pleasure, in our lives. So I think pleasure is what we need to talk about. Like, how do disabled bodies feel pleasure? We need to question how we have sex with each other, how we think of privacy, because sex a lot of times is equal to privacy in this country, at least when we when we got the 377 read down. It was all about privacy. It was because of that privacy law that was passed. But for disabled people, we cannot always have sex in privacy. We need to have help when we're having sex. It might involve hiring a caregiver, or having the government paying for caregivers. The government is not even paying for caregivers right now. And so there are no government jobs that are equal to caregiving. So if a caregiver is able to help a person have sex in the room, that is something that needs to happen. And it's not about privacy, it's about help. It's like helping a lot of parents help with using the bathroom for disabled people, and as an adult also. And I think those are the things that we need to question, thinking about how yeah, those are the things I think, that like understanding how bodies work, and how it's not about privacy, and also like what I also feel a lot of times is that we want friendships more than desire, more than people desiring me. I want people to listen to me. A lot of times disabled people are used as as kind of counselors. A lot of able people come and they want to tell us their stories. They want to tell us, oh, my sister is disabled, my sister is queer, my mother is this or that, and they don't want to listen to us. There is no stories that they want to listen about us, and they don't see us as friends. They want, yeah. So that's something that I always think about when it comes to desire, friendships. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those amazing points, Shivangi. And I'm going to go back to Jyotsna again and delve a little more into the assertion, Jyotsna, of, for example, the Dalit identity within the queer movement. So how important is it for us, to understand that it's not something that we can wait for a later date, that, the other things can get sorted, whereas this particular oppression that you face as a Dalit and a queer person, because we're often, as we discussed before, it's like, let's fight for like same-sex marriage first, and the other things can wait, because these are always conversations that we have. So how important it is that we also imagine a future for the LGBTQI+ community, and that it must include the annihilation of caste. How do we make sure that these movements are not operating exclusively of each other, rather work together? How do we ensure that?
Right. I think that's an important question. And before I get into that, I want to just say quick things that, just listening to everybody and also just reflecting back, I feel that all our identities and work that is so important, but it's still in silos. And I think that, everybody is fighting for their rights and for their identities, whether it's Dalits, Adivasi, queer, trans, intersex, disabled people. All of us are fighting for a space, to claim that space in society, to claim respect and to claim love. But what is happening in that process is that we're forgetting that while we continue to do that, we also have an accountability to hold each other, to walk with one another while we ask and claim our space, So as much as I want something for myself, I also should want something badly for my peers, for my friends, for my comrades, and I think that is fundamentally missing. And I find that missing because I feel that we are not willing to interrogate our caste, class, religion, privileges. And when I say that, I mean that these silos cannot be broken if you do not address the issues of caste. The idea of desire, the idea of body, the idea of sex, the idea of aesthetics, all of that is caste. And if you're not questioning any of that, then we will continue to work in silos. And I think we must work in silos. We must work on our own our rights and agendas and all of that. But at the same time, we need to do the work which is far bigger, which is to work with one another, to hold everybody together, because you cannot walk, the society cannot progress if we are only pushing for new identities every day, which we must. But what is happening to people who are with us at this moment, really struggling, so when I'm hearing Shivangi and I'm hearing Daniel and Saddam, there's all of us have similar anxieties, and not that I wouldn't say it's the same, but we have similar asks, and that ask is for respect, is for recognition, is for validation, it's for consent, and all of these things are look very different. So when I talk about consent with respect to intersex people or with respect to people with disability, it's not going to be the same. And even for me, I feel that caste is something which is fundamental, because no matter who we are and what other kind of identity we carry, two things that we all have is caste, a religion or not. I mean, caste, and I would say gender. We all have that. And the moment you're born, you're assigned a caste and you're assigned a gender. And if you're not questioning that, then I feel that all of those conversations are going to be in silos, and we will be moving forward, but we're only moving vertically. We're not sort of impacting horizontally. So how do we do vertical and horizontal is that change. I think that is important. And again, I feel this is something I keep saying, but privilege is not, again, vertical. It doesn't go that way, that okay, if I'm privileged, which means I'm privileged in every aspect. There are going to be areas where privileged people cannot be privileged, and people with less privileges, so it's a combination. And how do we unpack that? It's a complex situation, and that I'm constantly also reflecting upon. To be able to articulate one's identity is a privilege for me. A lot of people may not have that. So then I feel that for me, intersectionality is the only way forward, because intersectionality talks about my ask, talk about what I'm going through, what is my pain, what is my struggle, but it also is generous enough to say, hey, do you want to come with me and have that space for yourself also? And I feel like it is for me a utopian space, and which is why queer space should be intersectional, should be inclusive. And if I feel as a part of a queer community, or as a queer person, it's my responsibility to constantly push for intersections of caste, religion, gender, sexuality together. And I would include sort of like disability and other linguistic, regional, invisibilize history and assertions as well. And then another issue I feel that we're not kind of looking at is that sexuality is so interdependent on issues of poverty, homelessness, education, health, all of those things. And I think we need to stress on that. We need to talk about sexuality, but how is sexuality being impacted or impacting our other aspects of life, which is so crucial, right to shelter, right to food, right to education. And this impacts everything, and vice versa. Lack of education is going to further put you in a precarious situation as well. So I think we need to strengthen intersectionality within, in our work, in our life, and in our relationships, and constantly pushing for that, and not just asking for myself or my people, but also asking for other marginalized communities, other marginalized groups. And if we're not doing that, then I feel we're still not doing our work very well, or not, deeply questioning our identities. And I'm including myself in it. So yeah.
Absolutely wonderfully said, Jyotsna. Thank you so much for that. And, essentially, as you rightly said, I completely agree when you say, at the end of the day, all our relationships, our romantic experiences are essentially political and caste experiences, as something that you have said before as well. And it is just impossible and unfair for us to dissociate caste from that, because if you're able to do that, it's again a privilege that you're able to do that. And you need to make sure that you use that in the right way, as you rightly said, that the solidarity itself is extremely important. That's lacking. So speaking of solidarity, I'd like to go to Saddam once again. And because Saddam, like we said, there is a suppression of queer voices like yours in the mainland, and because of the multiple experiences that you face. And how do we make sure that we bridge this gap? And, because again, mostly when you talk about people again coming from that region, again, when I say that region, because we've been conditioned to refer to the Northeast as the Northeast and not individual states and identities. So how do we make sure that these things are brought into consideration, and how do we make sure that these movements come together, and these identities and oppressions and privileges that we enjoy because of the geographical location, or maybe not being from a conflict region, how do we make sure that these are in the conversation?
So one, I tell, I definitely understand. Like I believe what Jyotsna was saying was one thing that we definitely need today, because we have been often made to feel that we need a certain kind of validation. We have to mainstream in the larger square movement. Like some authority is there who approves that, okay, yeah, you're fine and you are not fine. So, sorry. Can you hear properly now? Okay. So mostly I also always ask about this, the need of validation almost everywhere. If we have to try to fit in somewhere, there seem to be kind of an authority which approves that, oh, you can mainstream and you cannot, and you are like it's checking out that you have worked enough and you are not new, you are old, you have experience or not. So there are so many layers of question marks of validation of if we are ready to fill into the mainstream movement, or who is not ready to do that. So the work that we do in the Northeast region has always been, it's very invisible. The one reason is because most of the programs and most of the projects which has been done for queer or LGBTI spaces has been based on numbers. So they have counted people as data, they have counted people as data, but for those people who are not invisible, they are not counted. So our invisibility is often taken as our inexistence, So that has been the one biggest reason of we not able to visualize or mainstream, and the other authority being able to reject us because we are not coming out in numbers. But the end of the day, what we are really working is towards what the rights, that we get equal opportunities, and we are treated with respect in our own land, and we are also able to get the services and information that other people are getting in other parts of the country. But again, most of the work that has been done on one nation, one model kind of format, where the differences are not looked into or differences are not acknowledged by this majority of people. And what we are doing is we are trying to fill the gap by localizing the the information that is available, by localizing the support system, because we may not be able to directly call to Delhi or Bombay and say that these are our issues. But people staying in our regions and who speak our language and who understands our culture or the belief system, the society is very different. So they will come to us or we will go to them, and that only then the issues will be, we can voice out the issues and we can talk about the issues in our own what do you say, on our local aspects. But that was not the model, that is still not the model in most of the movements or most of the works that has been done. And uh, uh, one thing which I also would like to add here is about the migration and reverse migration, that which we saw during this COVID time. Because when we realized that most of the people are not visible, but when COVID happened, almost 50,000 young people came back home in Manipur, and there was huge crisis. Crisis in terms of not able to access the services, not able to have a support system, because we, as even for our work, we have been working in a very limited scale because of the resources we don't get much of the resources, because most of the resources are trickle down, from the center to the periphery. It's trickle down, and whatever you are left out with, you have to manage with that. But it doesn't mean that we have less population and we have less people to care about. We still have the same population. The only thing is that it's invisible, because we have been working on different issues, around different issues, that queer issues become quite a very soft issue to other people, to the government, when they talk about other, bigger issues to them, of unemployment, of education, of drugs, and so many things. So we have been, to fill up this gap, even at least the local level. What we are doing is we are localizing the support system. We are creating safe spaces in almost smaller states, like forming collectives which can support themselves through mental health programs, because we cannot talk openly about sexual health or reproductive health at that level. So we are starting to work around sports. We are using sports as a mechanism to further the movement, because Northeast or Manipur, when we talk about, we can't do pride walks. We can't go out on the street and like 10,000 people joining and shouting. We can't do pride works. Pride works fits for Bombay, pride works fits for Delhi. But in Manipur, we can't do that. We have to localize that support, like we do sports, and how this has been using. And to some people, they might feel it strange that how can you use sports as a tool? But this works for us. Pride doesn't work for us. So people have to acknowledge that the movements that we are also doing are in our own ways, and it has been helping, it has been assisting. And yeah, we have to understand our privileges. Definitely, I we also understand what our privileges, and acknowledge that they are dominant, and these people needs to have an extra push. The like moving from equality to equity. That's what we need to do, and yeah, we are doing. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Saddam. As the finishing line pretty much summed up, that we have to move from equality to equity. And there are a few questions from the audience, and I'm gonna pose one question to Shivangi. So could you share a little about your thoughts on inspiration porn? So yeah, Shivangi, over to you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like what we spoke about desire is very much what inspiration porn is. A lot of times uh, a lot of times people look at a disabled body and they see that this is something that will somehow serve them. This is a body that will somehow serve them. This is a body that will help them, feel better about themselves, or even with neurodivergence, that is the case, where a lot of times neurodivergence is seen as uh, people who have mental illness, people who have autism or invisible disabilities are seen as someone who is very artistic, or either very artistic, or someone who is always in a crazy sort of sort of very crazy, and like a lot of creative energy is seen there, and a lot of people desire that, and that is also seen as an inspiration, that, oh, I wish I also had that in myself, and I feel like that causes a lot of problems, because there is no understanding of the history that we have, that as disabled people, as disability movements. There is no understanding of the disability movement. There's no exploration of the history, and as Jyotsna pointed out, intersectionality is not viewed. There is a very narrow understanding of what disability is then, because constantly the disabled people are then working. We are working on being palatable to able people, to the able society, to serve. How can we adjust? How can we serve the able society, the able bodied people? How can we fit into jobs that are made for able people? How can we fit into houses that are made for disabled people? And that's why it's a big problem. I think inspiration porn, it only serves the able bodied, the able person, the able society, and it doesn't serve us. The desire doesn't serve me. It doesn't serve like how I will access my space, how I will access other spaces around me, how I will access education. Even sex education is something that is not something that you'll see in a lot of disability schools, is being given to people, to caregivers, to parents, um, and yeah, I mean, also one of the things that like we really need to question when it comes to queer movements, and thinking of inspiration, is doing anti-capitalist work. That is very, very important, and I think even the other panelists have spoken about how this can be done, and how this should be done, because there is so much materials, so much material. The focus is on so much materials, that the rainbow is what represents uh, the queer movement, or the or some kind of shoes or clothing, or uh, these are the things, but it's not always visible. Disability is also not always visible. So that's why I think it's very important to question capitalism, because like I said before, it's about collective access. It's also about collective liberation. We need to work on our collective liberation together, as Jyotsna also pointed out. And yeah, I think even with inspiration, one more thing that I wanted to say, that even Daniel mentioned, was the medical way, the medical model of disability. The medical model of disability is basically that it is a medical problem and it needs to be fixed. And that is the way that the government sees us, and the way that even society sees us, uh, uh, because constantly there is this thing of how to fix the body, how to fix the mind. uh, Even within the mental health movements, that is all the same thing in mental health movements, is that it's so institutionalized, and disabled people are very much institutionalized. That is also another thing that that we face in many different movements is institutionalization. I think with caste also, Jyotsna mentioned that institutionalization is something that is constantly done to people with different marginalities, and it's this and what needs to change is we need to reframe that model of medical model of charity model is another one that we have in disability of giving charity, and we need to change it to a social model which is about the society, that we need to bring some change to society and not the bodies of people, and question society, and also the human rights model is better than at least medical model. So and now we have the disability justice model as well. So these are the things that people need to learn about instead of looking to our bodies for inspiration and for desire and for just following us and seeing that, oh, this person is so beautiful, or this person is so different, or things like that. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Shivangi. And I can see Shivraj back. I think he's here to alert us that we're running out of time. So thank you so much for all the panelists for making time for this. I think each of your opinions mattered so much today and always, as they have. So in a nutshell, for the LGBTQI plus movement to truly progress, as Jyotsna and everybody said, it's important to stop seeing ourselves as a homogeneous group and an intersectional approach where every oppression, privilege is acknowledged and addressed is the only way forward. Because just like I think Shivangi mentioned, the colors in the rainbow, our identities and our stories aren't the same, and every bit of it needs to be told and heard. Once again, I'd like to thank the panelists, Saddam, Jyotsna, Shivangi, and Daniel for sharing such wonderful thoughts and ideas, and for all the work that you do. Thank you so much for the opportunity. It was an absolute honor. And for everyone in the audience, for the patience and asking some important questions. We're sorry we couldn't answer all. I really wish we could extend the session, but we have other sessions lined up.